Good evening. Welcome to the November 15th, 2022 meeting of the Sherborn School Committee. My name is Amanda Brown, and I call this meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. We're pleased to hold this open meeting in person at Sherborn Town Hall this evening and are also live streaming with DSC TV for those who wish to view remotely. Please note that this meeting is also being recorded. First on our agenda is community comments. We have provided a Zoom link for those who wish to make a comment, but for whom it is not possible or prefer to attend in person this evening. Before I read the preamble, is there anyone who would like to make a community comment this evening? Please raise your hand if so. Okay, no one in person. All right, so we will move on then to our first agenda item. Ms. McCoy gave her updates last week, so you could look at the November 8th packet for details. So we're going to start tonight with Dr. Brown, the principal's report.
Well, good evening.
Thank you.
In my principal's report, I highlighted some of the ongoings since our last meeting. Our educators are hard at work having established professional goals for the year that align with our school improvement goals and our district strategic goals. Educators set goals with their evaluators every fall, and that's what drives the work that they do for student improvement and enhanced teaching and learning. So I spoke a little bit about that. I also wanted to illuminate some of the things we're doing in response to receiving MCAS results, and I know we'll probably have a more detailed presentation at a later date, but very important to me, not because of the MCAS assessment in and of itself, but the MCAS is intended to measure the criteria of the curriculum framework set forth by the state of Massachusetts. And our teachers spend a lot of time looking at the math program that we use and the Calkins reading and writing units of study and the science and social studies units that they develop over time. And I always want to make sure that we're getting back to the overarching bullseye intended for our targets for teaching and learning, which are the curriculum frameworks. So I shared with you, just for your information, a protocol that our coaches developed, and then over the next month or so, we will go back to the big picture of those learning frameworks to make sure that we're calibrated within each grade level and across the grade levels. And ever so important, as our teachers change grade levels and new staff are hired and inducted, I always want to remind us that the curriculum frameworks are our target. The programs and materials that we use get us there, but they're not the enchilada unto themselves. I might be hungry. I'm sorry, I'm using food analogies. I also wanted to give a public, heartfelt thank you to our Sherborn veterans who every year do a wonderful job giving their time and sharing their experience with our students. Tim Tapley was gracious and came to our all-school meeting a couple weeks ago, and Peter Moores from our town coordinated a panel of veterans to come do an assembly specific to our fifth graders, and it's important and sacred, and we really appreciate that they take the time to do that with us. Also a shout out to our music teacher, Miss Hodge, who will be, who last Friday, with many of our students, our fifth grade students from the chorus, participated in the Sherborn luncheon, the Veterans Luncheon, so that was very special. Those were the big enchilada. Well, again, back to food. Those are the big happenings on the Hill. We're very excited this Friday. Our police chief is bringing the new Sherborn police dog to meet us at all school meeting. So stay tuned for photo ops I'm sure we'll be engaging in. And any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the committee?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Ms. Vittori, you have your...
That used to be enough so fast. So you have your monthly warrant report. I'll just highlight one on October 26th, just because it looks like a large amount. It's actually the first of 3 payments that Sherborn pays to the region for all the shared staff. So that wasn't a lot of expenses going to the school. That was actually the first of 3 payments for a payment. So again, we list the funds, the warrants that are sent over to Town of Sherborn for processing, and they're by funds. It just gives you some perspective of how the expenses are being spent across the various fund groups that we have. Just moving on to the financial update. So because we only met like 3 weeks ago and I gave you sort of statements up to date, I did not give you new monthly statements. However, because most of our expenses are encumbered and there was so little activity. But I did include this month your special revenue and revolving funds, a statement of activity from July 1st through October 31st. A lot of these funds play into, you'll notice when we start talking about the budget, like we'll say that something's coming from the preschool revolving fund, something's coming from the non-resident tuition fund. You'll see circuit breaker on there. So it's just good to have the perspective of the revolving funds that you have access to, what the balances are and what the expenditures are so far. So I think one thing I'll point out is that, you know, we added the teacher of the summer for the additional section, and that's coming from your non-resident tuition fund. We're not expecting any revenue into that fund this year, so you can see where I noted that's probably the last time we have to go dip into that fund to sort of be a safety net for us for that perspective, unless we have some other tuition arrangements that we come down the pike. But as you can see, that was actually a nice thing to have. I think we did that 2 or 3 times over the last couple of years to help get a teacher in faster without having to go back to the town for additional funds post-budget. Any questions on that or the warrant report?
No? All right. So we can move on then to the proposed budget for FY24.
Sure. So if it's okay, I'll begin just by saying thank you for your attention and support this evening. I know this is one of the 3 major areas of responsibility for you as a school committee in terms of developing a budget that will support our schools. This is a process that Dawn kicks off in October, and it lasts with input from our principal and all of you through March when it officially is worked out with the towns. So I want to thank our community members for their continued support of our students and our schools. Dawn for her expertise and experience in financing, her collaboration with the towns. I know when I did my meetings with town officials, they recognized what a value Dawn is to us and appreciate all that she does in terms of transparency and her commitment to building a responsible budget. And I want to thank Dr. Brown for thoughtfully developing a budget to support the needs of our students at Pine Hill School, advocating for the needs of our students and teachers, and collaborating with other agencies, including the CSA, DSEF, and SAWIN, to provide other resources and supports to enrich and enhance the learning that comes from the operating budget alone. So thank you. I'm hopeful that tonight, as we review the budget and go through the details, you'll recognize the priorities around our strategic goals as a district. One being finding the best practices from challenge success, diversity, equity, inclusion, and our portrait of a graduate. Secondly, in terms of supporting all students through our MTSS system and the interventions and interventionists and specialists we've put into place, as well as our work around the equity audit and making sure that all students have access to opportunities. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have throughout this evening.
Great. So hopefully you had an opportunity to flip through your budget book over the long weekend. That timed out nicely for all of you. And I look at this as really the starting point, right? So we do this first round of budgets in order to meet both Town of Dover and Town of Sherborn. Both request that we have budgets into their systems by December 30th. And that allows them to start building their budget, right? And the schools are the largest piece. So you can see why they'd want to see like what we're sort of coming down the pipe with. But again, this is a starting point. We will be further acquiring information, having discussions both internally and with school committee. We're working on some things that we know we'll be bringing forward. So maybe some additional adjustments here and there for all 3 school districts. It's so early in our school year, right, to know everything that we're going to already do next year. And so we'll build upon this. This is typically a really good base, and the adjustments that we make from here until March are typically minor in nature, but key to getting done what we need to get done. like I said, Beth mentioned, Barb and her team, they started in the middle of October looking at their line items, trying to figure out what we need to add, what we don't need, and we take all that information and incorporate into the first version. So the starting point, we always look at what is the increase. So, and we look at your budget in two pieces. As you know, I always talk about the in-district and the out-of-district, because it really is sort of two separate business lines, if you want to think of it that way. So your in-district, we're looking right now at version 1 at about a 4.41%. For comparability, it was 5.31% last year. Remember that we did add quite a few new positions last year, so that's what brought it up to the 5.31. The 4.41, though, does include 2 new staff positions and some various operating expenses. If you look at the big picture, we've moved that teacher that is in the non-resident tuition fund into the budget. And as you see, we'll go through the detail. We've also picked up one more educational assistant on the special ed side. So that is sort of driving some of the payroll increase. This is one of those unique years too, well, it's not unique, it happens every 3 years, where we don't have contracts for salaries in which to build a budget. And so you'll notice there's a rather large number that just sort of sits in the legal settlement line item, reserved for contract negotiations. That is our estimate right now of potential pay increases. If you recall, our teaching staff, which is the majority of our staff, are on a matrix. So their salary is comprised of both steps and COLA. We calculate what steps would be if everyone's going to move along the matrix, and that's built into our reserve. So that is sort of taken into consideration. The out-of-district, on the other hand, is where we're seeing significant movement. As we've been talking about this year, we have the large variance, negative variance. Obviously, that just doesn't go away. So some of it's incorporated into the fiscal year 24 budget. We budget right now for out-of-district for all the placements that we know right now. And as the year continues on in the budget process, we know that there may be some changes, so that's definitely an area where we usually bring either pluses or minus to you, and we do our best guess as of March to pinpoint where we're going to be in July of the next year. So, and we can go through some of the detail on that. So there's an overview. If we go through the book, your tab 1 sort of has an overview, sort of summary memo that gives you some highlights. It also gives you sort of the timeline. So the next time that we'll officially meet on the budget is February 14th.
Valentine's Day altogether.
I know. I feel like that has happened before. And then we actually have our meeting with advisory on the 15th. And then the final version and your public budget hearing will take place on March 14th. So at that point, it leaves our hands and it goes to the town's hands, but March 14th is really our final approval date. So you can see how we do have time on the calendar to address a lot of this. So this is a good reference page. It's going to change after we do version 2, but this is sort of your starting point. If you just look at the key budget drivers, you will see that obviously payroll is our largest expense. We made a note that the contractual agreements are all under negotiations. You'll see the bullet point that we added the 1 FTE for classroom and the 1 FTE for special ed. I'll show you when you look at the next page where it sort of looks at it by sort of big categories, salaries and other compensation. The amount that you see the increase there, the $66,000, is really the result of post fiscal year 23 budget changes and the addition of the staff. And so there you can see that it's not all just addition of the staff that causes some of the changes. When you go through the line items, people changed between March of last year and when we opened up school. So you'll see some salary variations on some of the line items, which is just showing the impact of activity of budget to actual. So it's actually sort of nice not to see that embedded with all the salary increases too, because you can really see what happened budget to actual. And again, if
Do you
we
want to go through, or do you want us to ask questions along?
Yeah, let me just go through a little bit the overview and then we can go into questions. I just wanted to highlight too that any retirements that potentially come our way from the school are reflected in later budgets. In the contract, educators have an opportunity to notify us by November 1st if they think they're going to retire, because that entitles them to early retirement incentive payment of $5,000, but they really have until February 1st to rescind that. So we usually do not bring that forward any retirement information until we pass over that date, so that we are sure before we build the budget. You can go through some of the other highlights. We see very little pluses or minus in everything non-salary, because we are very conservative here, but this is at the point, as you know, what's happening in the world right now. We had to increase utilities, we had to increase some of our school-based supplies. We got to the point where we couldn't cut corners anymore, so you will see some increases in that. Again, in your book, if you look at tab 2, that's your one opportunity to see every line item that makes up our budget. If you look at the function codes, I always talk about function codes, say school committee, superintendent, that's what rolls up into your monthly financial statements that you see at a much higher level. So it's good to, it's actually interesting and I think beneficial for you guys to see what rolls up into each of those categories that are on your monthly financial. So if you take your monthly financial, you can sort of tie it, knowing that you've got salaries, though, and operating expenses all in the same function code. I tried to give you as much information as I could in the notes to make sense, and so you didn't have me here answering questions. So hopefully those were helpful. Also in tab 2, we do a summary of staffing, so you can see the different categories and where they're sort of categorized within those categories. And also we do a summary of anticipated grants, because not only do we operate the school based on the budget that you approve, but there's also supporting grants that we get from the state and the federal government that help supplement. Tab 3 is your enrollment projections. It's 10-year history and 5-year projection. We use a formula where it is in-migration, out-migration as of October 1st. So everything's looking at what was October 1st last year, what's October 1st this year, and that change is incorporated to the formulas that sort of propose what's going to happen in the outgoing years. We look at a 3-year average, and then we also look at what happened just the current year that just transpired, because sometimes that could be more accurate than an average if there's something going on. And so it gives you 2 ranges to sort of look at. You can notice they're not like crazy different. Some of them are by grades though, changes by grades. At the bottom of that page, because this was always something that I used to just pencil in myself, I took the projections from the 3-year and shows you your sections. And so you know we always sort of do have sections moving with cohorts, because our cohorts aren't even every time. But you can see that based on the 21 cohorts, the 21 sections which we have in the budget right now, all of your grades will be within your class range policy. So I think that's important to see. It can also shows you where you have room for growth too. In most cases you have some space, and we probably hopefully won't have to worry about adding a section post-budget. The next section we can go over a little more detail, but section 4 is really the detail behind out of district. The table that I like the most is down in the left-hand corner. It's interesting to when you think about that. I'm saying we had 10 placements in this year's budget, 10 placements that we are projecting for next year, yet our budget's going up. And so you can see the volatility in just student changes. So we had 3 students who are going to be graduating or aging out between now and July 1st. That's a savings of us for $165,000. Changes in placement, though, is which we've talked about this year. That's what's driving our over budget this year was $175,000. We have 3 new placements, again, which is what driving your over variance of $145,000. And one thing we haven't quite talked about yet, because it won't impact us until fiscal year '24, is the state has approved a 14% increase on all non-public approved out-of-district placements. And that is really driving up for a lot of schools, a large increase in that. And so anything that says it's sitting in your non-public column is seeing a 14% increase. Your public and your collaborative, we are estimating 5% increase. Typically we do 3%, but I think we already know that Accept, which is our own collaborative that we send students to, is budgeting a 5% increase. So that is a big budget driver for every district in the state. There is going to be some activity around getting more reimbursements because of this to sort of help school districts, because this will be a financial hardship to a lot of school districts. So stay tuned for that, because maybe there'll be some financial relief for us down the pike. So going back to just the budget in total, overall, you'll see that our out of district again is up 57%, but I think that table shows you sort of what's driving that, and part of it is obviously the tuition increase. With that sort of overview, I will open it up for detailed questions that you have, so you can better sort of understand any line items that you've looked at, any descriptions that need clarification. And then our hope is that you'll still continue to spend time with this book, and questions that you may come up in the weeks or coming forward, you can forward to Amanda, and then she usually sends them to us, and we'll be really prepared to answer them at the future meeting.
Can I just ask a question about the enrollment guide? So that I want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm not sure that I do. But like if you're looking at the first grade, currently has 69 children.
Yes.
So if you go to the first year, you're just saying that the 3-year rate of projection, if you use that number, then those 69 is expected to become 72 for second grade next year?
Correct.
But if you use the 1-year rate, it's expected to go up to 73,
Correct.
correct?
Right.
So second grade is currently 66. We're expecting next year to be down
Mm-hmm.
to 65?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you know it would go down?
Because of the in-migration, out-migration. So we've had more students leave in the last 3 years. And must be a grade that people have been leaving from, moving, whatever. And so if you see it for 1 year, you're like, okay, that could be a blip. But
Right.
third grade from second to third for 3 years has seen a dip.
Got it. And 72 for third grade up to 79, that's a huge jump. That's 7 kids.
Right, but you can see that that's where we had huge numbers this
we
year.
had 8 move-ins at that grade level.
Yeah.
So it's so this is all based on just like historical trends,
Yep.
like based
Yes,
on the last 10
exactly,
years.
exactly.
And so, but in the numbers, I think we think it's up to 21, right? Is the class size that we
23.
23. I thought it was 21.
Yeah.
So-
You're right. Your class guidelines are right there in the middle, above that black line. You'll see 18 to 23 is your policy for class.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so, but potentially, we could need more units, right?
More sections.
More sections? That's good, okay.
You'd have to. We'd probably have something that would be out of the higher than normal, so it'd be an anomaly. I think if you're going to get. You've
Because
got
the fourth grade already has 4
Right.
sections, and we're just expecting to keep 4 more sections. I just want to make sure I'm
Yes.
reading it properly.
right. So the sections did move a little bit with the cohort to make it work.
Right,
Yes.
because one had the lower
Exactly.
enrollment and one had a higher. So you
Right.
just moved
So usually
around.
once a grade kicks into having 4, they're gonna that teacher's
That
gonna
4 will
keep up with them, and it takes a while for if you get a 3. Sometimes by the time they get up to the higher grades, they might need a 4th teacher, but
But where we see
You're
an
not-
81 or
yeah.
79 isn't as alarming as it might seem because it actually is 4 sections.
Exactly.
And it keeps us below the number. So
Right.
it's just more if we get more than the projected amounts that you might have to add.
Exactly.
We currently have 3 grade levels with 3 sections and 3 grade levels with 4 sections.
Right. I just wanted to make sure I was reading it properly because it was confusing to me, so.
Yeah, so
now
when
I
you,
understand.
so what we did was take, so you could see, like, if you see the white table at the all in the white at the bottom,
Yeah.
that's where we are right now with section 34343, right?
Got it,
So we have
yeah.
21 sections. What I did was take our 3-year projections for 23, 24, and do that same table, but you can see now it's 334,
I understand.
344. So we have the right number of sections, we just have to change what grade each section is, and that's pretty common. For Pine Hill, it's becoming very common too for Sherborn, or I mean for Chickering, not to have that consistent 4, 4, 4, 4, because we are seeing
The change.
changes in the age groups of the
And
groups.
How long have we been at 18 to 23?
You used to be 18 to 23 and 23 to 25 for 4th and 5th grade. So my years, I get lost in my years, but I think was it 2 years ago?
It's 2 years.
The school committee approved to have a K through 5 class guidelines of 18 to 23. Because it used to be that 23 to 25 would cover your 4th and 5th grades.
So last year, when we added the additional 1st grade class, was it because we had more people enroll after March
Mhm.
that weren't expected?
Exactly.
And then, so
No,
that's what
and not
bumped the
even
number
after
up.
March, because we don't even really stop and look at March, right? This is October to October.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
So you don't know
the
who's
actual
moving or-
The actual enrollment did differ from, I mean, it wasn't enough, it was like 1 or 2 students. So it wasn't like a tremendous amount. But you get to a point where it would have tipped it over and we would have been just a little bit above the 23. But I think given the coming out of COVID and the age group, we felt like it was better to have smaller class sizes.
Makes sense.
And we had the capability to fund it with the non-resident tuition fund.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you might have a different discussion if it was 5th grade that was going to be at 23.1, but I think.
At the 1st grade level, given where they've been for the last
Exactly.
couple of years, it made
Exactly.
sense. Right. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And so what you have for kindergarten right now is because, as Dr. Brown said, she will be requesting the census that gives us sort of our starting point, are the 3 years average of kindergarten. That's what's driving kindergarten, because until we sort of get that number and see how it's been updated, we will update. If it's significantly different from what we're carrying in the projections right now, we'll update it for you so that we make sure that we're covered for kindergarten.
We're lucky in Sherborn, the census is when families move into town, they get on that census, whatever town hall does. It's a great projection for us.
Pretty accurate.
And it's important not to say, oh, well, 3 people moved in today or tomorrow, is that going to make a difference? Because the formula is looking at that October to October and the normal in and out. So we don't get overly excited about, oh, someone came in January. No, this is all taking that into consideration of 12 months worth of activity in each year. And we have found that, when you get really close to what may tip you over to adding an extra section, that projections aren't going to necessarily help you with that. But it gives us like a good viewpoint of, are we going to sustain those number of sections, and what is sort of our projection for the total enrollment at Pine Hill. And I think it's fairly close within 1 or 2 students each year I have found. So I feel like this is pretty reliable, that we sort of build our budget off of it.
Thank you.
From a process and cost perspective,
Mm-hmm.
if we've got an extra section at the current 3rd grade level that will likely needs to translate to the 4th grade level, is the process to take a current 3rd grade teacher, move them up? Or how do
Not
you?
necessarily.
How do you think about that?
Yeah. We're always looking at building instructional teams. We're looking at teacher certifications. Our elementary educators might have an early childhood certification that only licenses them to teach through 2nd or 3rd grade versus a grade 1 through 6 license, so it
So there's not necessarily like a further PD costs to get a teacher ready to go from third to fourth? Or
No.
to get first grade teacher, move them to fourth to be able to adjust for the cohorts?
As long as teachers are teaching in their area of licensure, teachers who are changing grade levels, we comp them a couple summer work days to get acclimated in their new curriculum and to get acclimated if they're moving physical space. We have a provision to help teachers do that over the summer.
Good.
And teaching teams envelop new members, with collaboration that often starts over the summer.
It's pretty common though to sort of, and then sometimes it's a desire on the school to sort of like just change the team, right? I think it's nice to have that
broad
fresh.
perspective
Yeah,
is
exactly.
healthy.
And then so that, I think that looking at the staffing report that's behind the large pages, just to sort of look at the total school, you'll see that we have, close to 46 FTEs of like educators. So those are your staff that are actually in the union positions, broken out by what you have classroom sections versus what we call the specialist, and then the special education group, and then supporting educators, which is your librarian, guidance, psychology, and nursing. And remember, we added in the guidance arena and in the nursing because we added the floating nurse to all 3 districts, and so you're picking up a share of that. And I think hopefully that will give our nurses some really good support. You'll see that having the floating nurse saves us a little bit because hopefully that floating nurse is available as a substitute, and it's really nice to have someone who knows the district come in and substitute versus just a random substitute. So I think that's giving higher quality care to our students in the district. The educational assistants, you have 23. We have 11 that are categorized in the general ed world. That also includes your interventionists. So those are the ones assigned to the grade level class sections, as well as the ones who work across subject level for deeper interventions. We're running the 1 pre-K program again. So there's 2 pre-K EAs assigned. You'll see where I noted that 1 is being funded by the pre-K revolving fund. So that's one of the funds that are on your sheet. Last year we had 2 being funded by the pre-K because we needed 3 EAs in the pre-K. One of those EAs is sort of associated with a student is now coming into the general fund. So we did have an increase in the general fund budget for that 1 EA that's moving to kindergarten. But we have 10 special ed EAs. You'll notice that I say 3 are funded by the special education grant. That's the 240 that's listed in your summary. 1's funded with circuit breaker, and then 2 are continuing to be funded with your ESSER grants. That'll be sort of the last year that we'll have that opportunity, but it's allowing us the opportunity to have additional staff in, one's a floater, and then another one is just allowing us to sort of play with our funds a little bit. But we will then see the need for those and incorporate them into the general fund going forward. But it has been nice at all the school districts to have the ESSER funds to pilot things. It's sort of been a luxury. And I think it's definitely strengthened instruction and support in all the schools, and it's allowed us to sort of try it out, make sure it works before we, roll it into your general funds. And then the rest are just what, the people that we need to actually operate, the building administration, your custodial staff, and obviously all the support that each district gets from central office. If you look at the summary of anticipated grants, these are all the grants that we have access to. We gave you some background as to sort of what funding purpose they serve towards your budget, if they're an annual grant, and a little bit of the purpose of the grant itself to make sure that how we're spending it meets the funding, and what our grant was in 23. Obviously, we don't know what our grants are going to be in 24, but they typically don't change significantly, so that's what we're sort of relying on. But that gives you a little more insight as to the sort of the other financial support that we have outside of what the town supports us with. And you'll see I do summarize, so you have approximately 65,000 of ESSER funds that we'll have available to roll into 24. And that is the last year those funds are available, so we're sort of timing it to make sure that we utilize them, and then it still gives us time to react next year when to budget 25.
ESSER's from the presidential allocation for COVID response.
Yes,
I'm saying
multiple,
that right,
yeah.
but that's-
They had multiple levels of those grants, and ESSER 3 is the last one that is available through September of 24.
So is there a way to easily identify what in the budget is currently being funded by ESSER, knowing that in the future that's going to have to either
So,
get cut or
Yeah, I sort of like,
layered in?
if you look at, I basically said how we're using ESSER in 23 is that we have one sped EA, summer tutoring, and the cost of year 2 of Panorama.
Yep.
And so Panorama is something, as I say, there's still initiatives that we're working on right now. I think that's a presentation slated for all 3 school committees in January. And sort of based on our final look at that and its impact and value, you'll probably see us come back with a budget adjustment to start incorporating Panorama costs into our general fund. Because up until now, in all 3 school districts, it's been covered by ESSER, which again is what I'm saying was so nice to have that flexibility to be able to go right out. I think Panorama across all 3 districts is a little over 30,000. To be able to go and do that right away and not have to worry about finding the money in our budget, but then prove it that it's worth bringing into the general fund. And so that was, it was a no-brainer when that came available to us. That was something we wanted to look at because we did have the ESSER money available. And it has an SEL component, which is one of the main things that the ESSER, there's a component in each of the ESSER that you had to spend on mental health and social emotional learning. So that actually sort of ticked that box for us.
I know last year at this time, we had a fair bit of discussion on sort of the need for additional guidance and SEL kind of support. Obviously, sort of circumstances driven. As you were pulling this together, was there anything where you were sort of the mindset of, I don't know, we don't have enough detail, we need to let a couple more months play out, and then that could be something that either works its way in as a up or down in this?
We are grateful and fully utilizing the additional counseling and social emotional learning interventionists that were afforded to us, and academic interventionists. And I'm happy to provide an overview of the numbers of students that are receiving academic and or social emotional support with those folks moving forward. As a general statement, I will share that we're feeling much more organized and accountable to knowing which students warrant additional support, and to scheduling and deploying those supports through our teachers and classrooms, and push-in models and pull-out models, Tier 1, Tier 2. This year we started more robust Tier 3 interventions for students who have emotional dysregulation kinds of needs. Last year, if you recall, about a year ago at this time, I talked to you about how our students who needed academic and social emotional intervention, we were prioritizing. This year, students are getting what they need. Not saying, oh, we'll work on this academic piece and then we'll work on this social emotional piece. Kids are getting 2-pronged or 3-pronged approaches with through Tier 2 and Tier 3 academic, social emotional. So I know that's sort of a broad response to your question, but we're very, very grateful, feeling that we have a really a strong accountable plan for being responsive to student needs, and and it feels tighter and more timely in terms of our ability to respond to students.
Great.
So
It's good to hear that that stuff is sort of successful, and hearing those updates is good. I guess as you guys were thinking about pulling sort of this together for this coming year, is there any data or things that you're watching that could drive kind of material changes or variances in this? Like, not saying that this is a good example, but MCAS scores were just released a couple of weeks ago, as you mentioned. As you guys pour through that data and try to think about what does that mean to how and when and where and why, could that result in, oh man, we're going to have to go and put 3 more math teachers in because we got to think about how we're meeting the curriculum standards and all that? Like, are those realistic things that we should kind of think about, or do you think that this contemplates sort of at least the current day's thinking in terms of what we'll need?
I think this accounts for what we need next year. We're excited right now to be piloting some math curriculum. There's a slow rollout that will ultimately impact K-8 over the upcoming years. We're piloting more focused ways to provide skill instruction to kids who have social emotional learning needs, and we've been using grant opportunities to fund those resources and trainings for our staff. So there are definitely things in the pipeline, as we're always doing action research and looking to bring solvent, cohesive resources to our teachers, to our students through our teachers. And John and Beth have been very creative about helping us utilize some of the grant monies available for those pilots and action researches, or things that we're reaching for.
Yeah, if you think about the grants, I mean, one of the key thing about grants is they should be supplementing, not supplanting. So I think we're very, we play that game pretty well, because we supplement versus building something in that we need. So that's where Barb was saying, like, Reader's Workshop, we have been able to purchase a lot of new materials between both elementaries using the title grants, which has allowed us to get there faster than if we relied on annual funding, the general fund. Some of the pilots, the math pilot, they are doing 1 or 2 classrooms. We actually purchased those curriculum materials through grant funds. So I think we very strategically use our grant funds to keep things moving at a faster pace.
Yep.
And not slow down forward progression, because we have to wait for the next year's budget to get the money that we need. And so, I do think that as a team, we are very creative in making sure that we don't squander those funds. I think we put them to excellent use, and we use that data to see where we're going to go forward. But I think the speed in which we can move forward with things is very advantageous with how we handle it. And it's given us more flexibility with the ESSER. I'm just going to sort of miss the ESSER a little bit, because if you're sitting around a table with me, I'm like, we'll use ESSER for that. We'll use ESSER for that. So I'm definitely going to miss ESSER. And we've almost depleted our ESSER at the 2 elementaries, just because there's been so many things that we could do to support those younger students. I definitely have, we have more of a leftover amount of money at the region, which we'll probably go with a different direction in how we spend that money, just because it's a different operation. But I really feel that from just talking to my counterparts in other districts, we've been really good and efficient and productive of how we've sort of used, I think, our ESSER money to benefit students.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of extra money that you can sort of.
Well, it
expand
definitely
the
at the
budget.
elementaries, I think why we used it a little faster than we did at the region is we just really added a lot of educational assistance in areas where we thought the students needed more small groups, the interventionist. We were able to run with that before we went through the whole budget process to get the immediate support in for those students and not have to wait. So that's where we're going to see we spent a lot of our ESSER money at the elementaries, was just people support that some have morphed into our general fund because we need them, and some where maybe could just been temporary. So that's what we'll spend this year doing, knowing that we still have some flexibility with next year's budget.
Do you have, off the top of your head, past 3 years, how much we've spent of ESSER?
Well, so the elementaries, I think the first year, the first grant was only like about 30,000. The next one was like 80 or 90,000, and the second one was about 150. So you've got 60 left in that pool. I will say ESSER 1, 2, a little bit more of it was PPE, was real COVID stuff. We had the reopening grant that was really helped all of our remote learning, Zoom, mask, face shields. I mean, the whole
Devices.
right, devices. Oh yeah,
Added so many devices.
And so then we've been able to step back a little bit. We're still using ESSER for devices. We actually purchased devices for all the educational assistants to have at the elementaries, and we were able to do that pretty quickly because we had ESSER funds. So now the cliff with some of the technology, which I've talked to a lot with Anthony Rotaco about, is we bought a lot of technology with ESSER. So what is going to be the impact on the budget? So he is putting together a 5-year replacement plan. So we're not going to be shocked. And we're going to be strategic about when we start replacing all these things that we did purchase. So that will be coming, probably later in the school year, of just sort of his vision of our replacement cycle and how we're going to sort of incorporate that in. We've had a little luxury in the budget the last couple of years in the technology supplement because we were able to purchase so much through COVID-related funds, but that little relief is going to, at some point in the next year or two, turn back to be more like the $40,000 that we would see on an annual basis being
Is that capitalized or expense?
expense because the devices are all almost like a supply nowadays.
And that was typical pre-COVID, the 40,000 range.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's not new and different, it's just returning to.
It's returning, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've actually, it'll be interesting because we've almost basically gone 1-to-1 at the elementaries. We weren't that before, so that's where it's going to be interesting when he plays all that out to see how it rolls out. Just to highlight, like I said, there's, you'll see a lot of post-fiscal year 23 retirement or salary changes. Again, that's just where people changed. If there was an area where we put a one-time expense in, specifically in the technology contract of services, if you remember during one of the budget adjustments, we added $12,000 at each district to cover the website upgrade and the financial system upgrade. So we took that out this time, right? So we're very good about, we don't leave the one-time expenses in the budget, we do remove them. And so that was taken care of. And I think you'll recall, and you know this from your fiscal year 23 financial reports, that we did convert 2 EA positions into a new special ed staffing position, which, because we had to add, looks a little weird when you look at the numbers, but know that that was embedded in there. One other little area that's been a little bit of an uptick for us, and we're all feeling it at our own houses, is utilities. So the good news is back in May of 21, my procurement company that I use for gas did reach out. So we did lock ourselves into gas at a lower rate starting this month than we were paying. So that's a plus for us. But on the flip side, electricity is not looking so favorable. So we did lock ourselves into electricity contract starting next December, but it's about a 40% increase in supply cost. And we're waiting for the Eversource increases on delivery that I hear are coming.
So how'd you only
in
get to
January.
2,500?
Because it's a split year. The actual increase in the supply cost is not going to happen until middle of next year. And again, that is only on the supply. Yeah.
You're basically a quarter of the expected
Yeah.
increase.
Yeah.
Is sort of how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, so, and we had a little bit of, I think in electricity, we had a little bit of a cushion if you look at the actuals. So I didn't have to go quite up because I had some trend budgeting that I could have taken away if I didn't have some external circumstances that made me need to add more.
Another kind of question I had as I was going through that, I was trying to tie out the 320 for the out of district to your out of district sort of worksheet. I'm
change.
probably not doing that right, but I wasn't able to do that. Is there,
Yeah, let me see.
I kind of appreciate the total number. I guess I'm just given with the magnitude of the change year over year, and I know there's not a heck of a lot that we can necessarily do to influence or change that, and that we're doing a lot already to
Yes.
invest in sort of our capability to kind of keep kids in district and sort of work through them through the normal schooling.
So the reason why it's hard to look at the gross numbers and compare it in the budget is because of how much circuit breaker we use. So that's the difference in the circuit breaker. We used 360,000 of circuit breaker in fiscal year '23, but only 300,000 in '24. So that 60,000 is a funding difference, not a student difference. So if you take the 320 minus the 60, you're going to get the 260 that I explained. And there will be a quiz on it afterwards. So one thing that I plan to do, so we don't have the number. So circuit breaker reimbursement for fiscal year '23 has been posted, but what they haven't given us is the detail by student. And at the region, we get all the circuit breaker for any Dover or Sherborn resident who's 6th grade and above. So then we have to take the detail and break it out by town. But that detail too allows me to see how much we're getting in transportation, what we're getting per student. It is calculated per student. So when we get that, that's the meeting that I hope to sort of have add a short one in your January meeting. I'm going to do a formula for you where I just take like a base student and show you how it works to give you a better framework of what we're up against when we're trying to decide like how much circuit breaker we're going to get, how much do we use, and I think that'll give you a clear viewpoint of what happens. So unlike Dover, so if you went and looked at Dover's budget, Dover, when they budget out of district, assumes they have absolutely no circuit breaker coming in. So my table works in their perspective because it's not being clouded at all by circuit breaker. Here, we do fund your general, we can't build a budget without assuming we're going to use some of the circuit breaker. And where we land depends on how we sort of communicate with advisory and what the budget can handle, what we feel like we can do. I will say, as you know, we pushed the limits last year a little bit on circuit breaker and did that last 60,000. We had an unexpected placement though after March, so I sort of lost a little bit of our cushion, and then ended up with a year where we have more than what we know what to do with at this point. We're going to figure it out, but that's where it is nice to leave yourselves a little bit more cushion in circuit breaker for the unexpected placement so that we have a funding source for it. You're allowed to keep from year to year a year's worth of your circuit breaker. It's a little different again because how I told you how the region gets all of the circuit breaker for the older kids. If you don't have a lot of elementary placements, that's what sets what you can keep. And so I will show you the breakout between elementary circuit breaker and region circuit breaker, where we're able to sort of take some of that region circuit breaker and still use it to the benefit of the town for what we can keep is we prepay. So you are allowed to prepay. So one thing in the municipality world that you're able to do prepay is out of district tuition. So I prepaid about $125,000 this past year to use that. That's how we got up to $360,000 that we applied to the budget. So
That's great because our out-of-district numbers at the elementary level are historically low.
exactly.
As is our goal. So thankfully that.
Yeah, you can pay a full year of collaborative tuitions and 3 months of a non-public. So luckily we had a nice collaborative that we were able to pay in full. And so that's a strategy that a lot of districts use, but it definitely helps us here because of that cap of what we're allowed to keep at the town level.
And John, do I recall that the circuit breaker rate that is set by the state can vary 5 or 10% from year to year, correct?
It can,
Or it has
although I will say they have been very aggressive to fund it at the mandated 75%. And so for the last 3 years, we have been getting 75. And the beauty of that is, like, I know now that I'm going to get 75%. Back in the day, your initial payments may come out and it would maybe be 70%, 68%, I think was the lowest during my tenure. And then you'd wait till June, and then if they had enough money, you might get closer to 75, but it's really hard to plan when that happens. So it is nice to know today that they have approved and we're going to get 75%. What I'm looking at is what they were able to do with transportation, which is new, and it's great that we're finally getting reimbursed for the out-of-district transportation costs, because in some instances it costs more for out-of-district transportation than it does for all your gen ed transportation. And so it's really helpful that districts are getting some reimbursement on that. So they speed track that a little bit. I'm not sure how it all played out, which I'm waiting for the detail. And I didn't budget for that, so hopefully they'll get enough that it'll give us a little extra. Yeah.
Will you give us that circuit breaker, maybe a quick 2 minutes on definition of what circuit breaker is? Just
Yes. Well, I'll show you the formula and how we are.
No, but
Oh, what is it?
why that money even exists and sort of how
Right.
it becomes.
Right.
I think might be helpful for some of us.
Right.
So it's an extra 10 or 12 kids maybe projecting year over year. Space issues, and is there any consideration for cost associated with that, or we think we can house the crew in the on the hill?
Well, we work
We're gonna use our outdoor
very
learning.
cozy working relationships. Yes, later in the agenda, we'll talk about the outdoor classroom that we have procured a funding source for. Yeah, we're continually prioritizing and refining and being creative, and, a lot of us share office space, and as you know, our wonderful heartfelt school building that was built in 1957 was built with classrooms and some common space in mind. I either have small offices or large classrooms. There's no in between for some of the small intervention programs we've started. It's right, and we're continually refining. This year, one of our 2 Spanish teachers is on a cart. She gets her workouts and goes class to class every day, and those are the concessions we make, and it's not ideal, schools everywhere do what they need to do to house grown-ups and children in creative ways. So, do I wish we had more gathering spaces and meeting spaces and therapy-sized rooms? That will be in the someday plan for Sherborn.
The last tab in your book, just before we go and actually ask for your approval of both the operating budget, is the capital budget. So this is our first pass. This will probably be refined, but the only item that we're looking at bringing forth for fiscal year 24, and we have been carrying this along in the 5-year outlook, is the EMS upgrade. So we performed the upgrade at the region 2 years ago. This past summer, we did the upgrade at Chickering. And the goal is to have all of our energy management systems all on one sort of platform, so that our director of facilities could be sitting anywhere and be able to look into the systems, make corrections, help assist if there's issues. It brings smarter technology to us for energy efficiency, which will be, I've already sort of cut the windows a little bit. The regions where we can sort of play around with that, just to be smarter about how we use energy. So it's upgrading our capabilities from that. So we have a firm that we've been using at the other 2 schools who we have a base estimate from. We will ask them to update that, and I'll change any pricing that needs to be done on this, but that is something we want to move forward. We are continuing at both the elementary schools to delay the roof work, because we're not having issues at either location, And we just want to make sure we do that right and thoroughly think about options that we have available to us. And we'll continue to work with the town sustainability group on that to see what kind of energy efficiency that we can do, whether it be solar or something else. So we don't operate in an isolation on these things. We work closely with the towns. In fact, after we get all three budgets out the door, we will be convening the building subcommittees at all three districts. And Dennis, are you the building? I don't know who the building rep is. Yeah. Just to bring building, Barb, your head custodian here, our director of facilities, just to sort of talk about your perspective and where we're going. And there may be one or two smaller projects that we need to add on here, but we'll know that before January. So tonight we will ask you to approve version 1 of the operating fund and version 1 of the capital budget, knowing that really it's the $75,000 that you're moving forward for capital.
I'd just like to say thank you. Incredibly thorough, so appreciate it. And for helping to come up with everything to kind of doing the gymnastics for it.
Tricky that we're thinking about 24.
I know.
It's very tricky. Still working on it. 22, 23, I don't know what year I'm in.
Yeah, and you're doing this for 3 different.
Yeah, so I've got Dover numbers in my head because theirs is going out Friday, so I was like, wait, which budget am I thinking about?
That's what I'm so grateful that you're able to make this accessible to us and know that, like, you're so facile with the details. It's so helpful. And thank you for being so nimble and creative and making sure this budget's meeting all of our kids' needs. I think that's really, really great. So do we have any more questions, or are we ready?
Again, any questions, just send them to Amanda. We'll make sure, if they're easy questions, I'll get them right out to you, but it's always good to have it publicly disclosed too, because there is no question that's not worth answering.
So I'd like to invite a motion to approve the operating and capital budgets for FY24 proposed first draft.
Dennis, so moved.
A second?
Peter Russo, second.
And any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
So unanimously in favor. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, our next action item is our consent agenda. And there are a couple of things for us to look at that are in your packet. First is the approval of the minutes of the October 18th meeting. And then we have just an overview of grants. And actually the overview in the budget book is really helpful too, to see what's coming from what grant.
Yeah, so we're actually asking you to accept the grants that we've received for fiscal year 23.
Okay. And we have a donation. Would you like to tell us about that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I brought this beautiful visual to remind you, if you were on the school committee at the June meeting, this outdoor classroom proposal that our educators and CSA and Veggieville representative parent Julie Dreyfus Vitale have been having this vision for an outdoor classroom. This started long before COVID, and COVID reminded us the importance of outdoor education and communing. This outdoor classroom will connects, if you remember the presentation that she gave a wonderful and detailed account for how it connects with our K-5 life science units. It connects with our community through Pine Hill Promise, character traits, and gathering opportunities, and it relocates the Veggieville planting beds and adds, in addition, sensory garden with scents and sounds and textures and some memories of retired teachers, i.e. a sunflower garden for Miss Sullivan and some benches in memory of staff and students. And the pergola, the piece de resistance, is large enough for us all, for a whole class or more, to gather under with flexible benches that will be able to be configured for the purpose, and it has this umbrella fabric over it. So we look forward to, there's a fairy garden in one of the, I'm especially excited about that. So we had hoped that DSEF would be a funding source for this vision, and that wasn't able to happen due to COVID and fundraising restrictions and some reorganization going on with that organization. So the Samhain Fund, in commemoration of their 150th anniversary, has generously offered to donate $30,000 to support this project. Pine Hill families have been very generous. The benches are already funded. The Mudge Foundation gave a $10,000 grant last spring. A local artist, this does not do justice. This is all this Pine Hill Promise statue that a local artist is working on, donating their time. The grant will afford the materials. Symbolizes the character traits for every grade level, the Pine Hill Promise words, if you will, in the colors of those grade levels, which is sort of our signature piece de resistance. And visually, depending on the angle you look at the statue, you see children developing, forms of children developing through developmental stages. It's quite symbolic. And it's cornered with the learning lab that the Samhain Fund already funded for us, which is our really fancy gardening shed that will eventually be solar powered and tie in with all the Sherborn sustainability goals, well, many of the Sherborn sustainability goals through solar power and rainwater capture, et cetera. So all of this will sit corner on our front playground, and families and children and educators can pass through and enjoy on their own or enjoy collectively. And we look forward, there's a mindfulness component. It's all of the things that our Pine Hill and our Sherborn community espouse in the things we value. It's quite special. Everything is sustainable and indigenous, and I can't do justice to the level of detail that Julie Dreyfus can do. So we're asking that you accept the $30,000 grant from the Samhain Fund, and Sean Colleen and our Sherborn DPW have been part of this, and our school district knows what long-term expenses, if any, that we might need to incur. They've had the Water Commission. Everybody's had a piece of this. It's incredibly well thought out.
And I feel like it's such a great example of the community coming together for our kids. Yeah, it's incredible.
Perhaps she'll hold meetings there in the future.
Maybe, that would be cool. Yes, thank you so much to the Samhain Fund.
Even cooler that all the benches are all paid for. I think a lot of it was like the donations, right,
Yeah.
through this ASA last year, which is great.
All right, so could I have a motion to accept the consent agenda, which improved, do you want to speak to the grants at all, or no?
Well, I think this is the
it's in
first
our
time,
packet.
yeah, this is the first time that we're asking school committee. So these are entitlement grants that we automatically get because we meet certain requirements. But I think there's been a desire to treat these equally to like the gifts that you accept, because these are monies coming in. And so to be fully transparent, we wanted to just start bringing, so we waited until all the fiscal year 23 grants had been approved so we could just do one, because they get approved over probably a 3 or 4 month period. And know that we actually, so you're entitled to this money, but then we have to submit a budget that meets their specifications to say how we're going to spend the money. So all that's when they actually get approved. So they sort of like get allocated, you submit your budget, then they get approved. So these are all now available for us to spend, and you'll see these titles of grants actually on your warrant report when you see that we spend them. So you can sort of see how it all sort of ties in together.
Great, thank you so much. All right, could I please have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Dennis Quant, so moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Gita. All in favor? We have a late-breaking addition to our agenda. Kristen is our liaison to the Sustainability Committee, and she had a quick announcement. And as you'll see, there's some fine print at the bottom of your agenda that we can raise things at the last minute if we need to, and this just came up. So, Kristen, do you want to speak to the sustainability?
Yeah, just really quick.
Thank you.
I connected with Dorothea von Herder about the Climate Action and Resilience Plan, and as a part of that, she and her team are developing a survey to just sort of get a sense of what parents, particularly she's interested in hearing from parents in the Pine Hill community about their sense of what are some of the strengths and areas of need around sustainability and energy, and just wanted to let everyone know that that survey is going to be disseminated and available November 16th through December 29th. We're hoping to put it in a CSA newsletter, and I think there's probably other ways in which she's planning to disseminate, but I just wanted to give a heads up to look out for that and encourage people to look out for it and to complete it.
Yeah, she's enlisted the
Thank you.
students on the sustainability task force to actually do in-person interviews on these same questions. And again, that's a generational, right? To sort of involve them. But obviously, the students that are on the sustainability task force, this is like a passion for them. So it's great for them to be able to go out into the community and do some of these surveys. And they're obviously going to get community service hours for it. So she presented the same sort of spiel to that group 2 weeks ago. So be happy to see this sort of kick off and they start acquiring the data.
Thank you. So just the rest of the things in your packet are some communications. And I also just want to let the community know that Ms. McCoy's newsletter came out today too, so there's lots of information there. And are there any agenda items for our next meeting? You know the budget is going to be on there. If anyone thinks of anything, let me know. We don't see each other again until February. So
As your own committee, but
as our own committee, yes, we'll
January,
meet in January as a joint
because
committee.
most likely before or after we will probably schedule like a half-hour meeting for you guys, so we can just sort of touch base on where we are with the out-of-district budget situation.
Thank you.
I'm hoping we'll have some type of update on the policy audit as well.
Oh, great. Good. All right, I think that's it. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
So
All right, all in favor? Thank you, everyone, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
All